Money FM 89.3, the best of the afternoon update. The Afternoon Update with Lin Li Fu.
Money FM 89.3. Now, Singapore's energy story is evolving, and so is Southeast Asia's. As countries race to meet rising electricity demand while cutting emissions, one energy source is making a quiet comeback: nuclear. But this isn't the nuclear power of decades past. A new generation of small modular reactors, or SMRs, is being touted as safer, cheaper, and more scalable. And ASEAN may be paying closer attention than you think. Joining us on Industry Insight is Trung Ghi, partner and head of energy and utilities practice at global consultancy Arthur D. Little, to help us understand where nuclear might fit in ASEAN's energy future and how Singapore could play a role, even without building a reactor. Trung, welcome.
Thanks, Linley. Thanks for having me on this radio chat.
Nuclear has been out of the spotlight in this region for years. Why are we seeing renewed interest now?
Yeah, look, I would say nuclear has a bigger chance to come in the energy transition discussion since, I guess, COVID days, and with the geopolitical uncertainties. Energy security is a big topic, and all forms of energy is welcome. Nuclear, being one of this, is more greener in a way for long term, as well as that there's potential for everyone to access clean energy. So that's why nuclear is back on the picture.
Okay. I think that's huge, right? Because ASEAN's electricity demand is expected to nearly triple by 2050.
Exactly. And so if we wanted to make sure that everyone has access to cheap electricity, we won't be able to have resources like Australia or others where you got solar, where you got wind. So what else is there? Unless there's other new technologies coming up for greener, cleaner fuel, nuclear would be the next best thing, if not ultimate for us to have in our portfolio.
Yeah, and I think nuclear offers consistent low-carbon power as well. And with newer technologies like what we're going to be talking about, SMRs, I think it would become more affordable in future. So let's zoom in on those SMRs, small modular reactors. What exactly are they? And how are they different from the traditional large-scale nuclear plants people might be familiar with?
Yeah, as you already mentioned, it is a small modular, so which means it's something that you can put into a smaller size land. So countries with limited acreage would be able to have a small modular reactor nuclear energy source. We're also looking at even more of a micro modular reactor, which could fit into your basement. So imagine the technology getting further enhanced, that we can now have energy sources from a nuclear point in a very small plot of land, which then means clearing out for safety zones may not be as large as what we see today in a large nuclear power plant. And therefore, the requirements for governments to zonings and other protective matters for our society is less required. Not to say it's not dangerous. We still have to have all the safety requirements as if you're handling any nuclear, whether it's large or small. But the idea is that technology is getting better in a way that we can make things in a smaller modular way where we can scale up in the end, or have it in island by island, or even on a floating vessel where you can support Indonesia, for example, in their various islands, right? And then all you need is a subsea cable that connects to the land, which also allows a bit more of a safety distance than having it directly on the land itself.
Okay, is that a cause for concern, safety?
It's always going to be, regardless of what we do, whether we have different energy sources. Even fossil fuels, there's safety concerns and how we extract it. And, now we have environmental issues with global emissions. So nuclear, there is always going to be a safety aspect, and people will need to consider how do we regulate this properly. And imagine also there's memberships you'll need to do or get involved in with the global community. Then there's also supply chain on how do we move our nuclear sources. And once we have in there, how do we contain that and maintain that so that we don't have disasters in a way, right?
No, I was just thinking with these SMRs, they could be designed with advanced safety systems, perhaps?
Correct. And remember also, these are less than 300 megawatts, more or less. And so the reactors definitely a lot smaller than what we see today. And so the safety standards, even though we need to keep at a high level, it's not as dangerous as we see. And given the technology, as you mentioned, the simulations we're looking at, the advanced modeling, we could be really looking into even more safety mechanisms for SMRs.
Okay. Are we seeing real momentum in Southeast Asia, or is this still more exploratory at this stage?
Look, we are seeing momentum, and one of the key things to think about, Lin Lee, is that globally there is 19 milestones you need to maintain, and some of the countries within Southeast Asia, like Thailand, Indonesia, Malaysia, Philippines, they've reached, say, 16, 17 of these milestones. The last few milestones are really setting up the organization or bodies, what we call NEPIO, to manage the nuclear aspects of it, the policies, regulations. And this outfit is going to be an independent body outside of everything else we've seen today. And so that would be one of the last few steps to look into. And so a lot of the countries in Southeast Asia are already taking some steps to create that. Just a few days ago, you also would have seen Malaysia looking at stepping up, putting together plans as part of their energy portfolio. And so it is almost a reality in a way that there are attractions. Singapore has set aside $5 billion for R&D. You got the Thais working with South Koreans on SMR planning. So a number of things are happening in the background.
If I'm not mistaken, the Philippines has also launched a national nuclear roadmap.
Exactly. And given the discussions we've had with a couple of key stakeholders, private utility players and so forth, even the Department of Energy, we're seeing tractions on how do we build this roadmap where the ecosystem is established so that we can have supply chains, we can have regulatory bodies. And so everything is coming to place in Philippines as well.
Wow. And one of the less talked about aspects of this shift is the technology behind it. How are tools like AI or 3D printing reshaping how we see, build and operate nuclear systems?
Yeah, so a lot of this, Lin Lee, is really helping us advance where we are today in regards to how do we simulate the designs, the fabrication, the logistics, with high-performance computing as well, with AI. They really are a powerful combination for us to accelerate some of our thinking, some of our designs, and some of our regulations. Imagine the safety that we mentioned before. And if we already understand how to simulate these with the different technologies, with AI and so forth, we'll be able to see different scenarios and therefore anticipate how we can manage if it's, say, on a small island versus on a floating vessel. So it is really helping us leapfrog some of the things that we saw other nations embark on decades ago.
So they cut construction time and, I suppose, improve quality as well as safety.
Correct.
And cost?
Cost is a big factor for sure. As we saw with batteries and solar, costs have gone down dramatically given the technology advancements. And thanks to, the AI component and the design simulations that they can do quickly for us, nuclear will be the same. We'll see costs improving in all aspects of the technologies.
Okay, coming to Singapore. Now, Singapore has taken a cautious approach to nuclear, not ruling it out, but also not pursuing it in a big way yet. What role could it realistically play in the region?
Yeah, look, Singapore's interesting, I guess, play within the Asian community, given that it's quite advanced in its ambition for net zero, clean energy, and we're seeing from the Asian power grid also the interconnectivity into Singapore for cleaner fuels. And so this also means that with this demand, not just offshore wind or hydrogen, nuclear could be another source that the other nations who is able to build it, say Indonesia, Philippines, could then connect into Singapore, providing with Singapore 24/7 clean energy. So with the regulations being advanced, being the net zero ambitions quite advanced as well, the energy demands for Singapore for cleaner fuel, that drives the neighboring countries to help set up things like nuclear power sources or offshore wind and so forth.
So we don't actually need to build a reactor to lead.
We don't need to. I mean, you look at Singapore and what they do so far as a service-oriented country. You don't need to build a lot of things, and yet you're thriving through services.
Okay, so you're talking about shaping nuclear policy and safety frameworks.
And it's going to be an entire region's effort as well, right? Because nuclear is a big undertaking. Costs are going to be massive, even at an operational level. And so everyone will need to work together to form the supply chain, the policies, the inter-country policies so that we can actually set a more streamlined processing for approvals and so forth, which will require a lot of effort. And Singapore would be one way of spearheading this.
Earlier in the interview, we touched on it a little bit. Nuclear energy still makes many people nervous, from Fukushima to Chernobyl. The legacy of risk is hard to shake. So how can that be addressed in this region, in ASEAN?
Like everything that's new to us, to the industry, to the region, there's always going to be a lot of awareness, a lot of education campaigns. There's going to be a commitment by the public sector with the government and the private sectors to ensure that all the necessary activities are done to be safe, to supply cheap energy, and that it's sustainable. And we can see that from the European markets where they've got nuclear for a number of decades. And when we look at the accidents that have happened, it's not the technology in itself, but potentially the design flaws or human error. So now with technology and AI and so forth, we then have different risks to look at. And so once we convince, the community that this is a power source that we can manage the safety, I think there's going to be a shift in their mindset as well.
Okay. And Trung, do you see potential for regional collaboration on safety, infrastructure, or even cross-border power sharing if nuclear becomes part of the mix?
Yeah, and I think this is important, right, Lindley, as I mentioned before, that the cost and operation or OPEX part of it will be intense. And it'll be a marriage that you're going to have for 100 years or more. And it's not just power generation of electricity from nuclear, but it's also the disposal and the waste, decommissioning, that will take another 50, 100 years. So there's going to be a long-term commitment, and it's a marriage for life, more or less. And so I hope that the collaboration will be done now. And that's why I think with Singapore taking a little bit more charge with the discussions on the connectivity with other nations, the Asian power grid, there's a lot to do for us to reduce the cost, improve technology, and enhance everyone's, electricity access.
Yeah, I can only see benefits from collaboration and cross-border power sharing.
Yes.
Now, finally, what's the realistic outlook for nuclear adoption in Southeast Asia? Are we talking 5 years, 15? And what needs to happen first?
Look, I think nuclear, in terms of setting policies, typically it will take, up to 10 years or so. But because we've already reached a certain number of milestones and we have a few steps left to do, there's then setting up the ecosystem. There's then training, building capabilities around the supply chain, but also how do we operate, maintain, but not only at the operation level, at the facility level, but also at the regulatory level. So there's a new generation of education to be had in our school system. So I would almost say put this as part of your curriculum in any of the, engineering degrees or policy setting degrees. Start thinking about how do we bring in international know-how and build a ecosystem around that so that we're not too dependent on supply chain risks if geopolitical tensions do increase. And then obviously having more technical advancements, R&D, hubs where we could create efficiency and scale. This will be things that I would see in the next 5 years or so whilst we look into establishing our frameworks over the next 5-10 years.
Trung Ghi, thank you so much for helping us unpack this complex but fascinating space. It's clear that nuclear energy, especially in the form of SMRs, is no longer a fringe option, but part of a serious conversation about ASEAN's energy future. Thank you.
Thanks for having me, Lindy. Appreciate it.
He is Trung Ghi, partner and head of energy and utilities practice at managing consulting firm Arthur D. Little. You've been listening to Industry Insight on Money FM 89.3.
To listen to more great interviews, download our podcasts at audio.sg or download the audio app. That's AWEDIO, audio at the App Store and Google Play.